Now welcome to another lightning response video where this time I'm going to try to do a few questions, and I'm going to kick it off with this one from Callowin Loves Metal, who asked, "Hey Thor, I've asked this before, but do you think that if episode 8 and only episode 8 was remade into a movie that connects episode 7 and 9 in a coherent way, teases Palpatine's return and Rey's lineage properly, as well as Finn's character, that without changing anything in episode 9, the trilogy could be made to be good or at least better than what we got?" And I do think it could have been better, but I think the problem is episode 9 in many ways is a reaction to episode 8. It's a course correction. So if you don't have 8 being The Last Jedi being what we know it to be, I don't think 9 would have been the same thing. In other words, if J.J. Abrams, say, had done episode 8, I don't think he ends up at episode 9. I do think that, yes, in many ways, episode 9 is connected to The Force Awakens. It's a kind of a continuation, but I think many things would have been different. I really don't see how he was setting up the return of Palpatine, for example. I think his idea was to go all in on Snoke. I don't think we would have seen Rey being the granddaughter of Palpatine or the daughter of a failed clone of Palpatine or anything like that. I think he had very different ideas, and then after episode 8, he again tried to go back to some of them, but had to change some of them. So I don't know that I can say yes and just leave it at that. And the funny thing about episode 9 is it has some good moments in it. I know it's a really bad movie. There are some really goofy things in there. There are things that are just overblown and so out of proportion that they feel ridiculous, like that Palpatine has this whole fleet of Death Star destroyers, hundreds and hundreds of them that he made in secret. We have things like light speed skipping that just make absolutely no sense and are ridiculous. We have other things in there like the dagger and how you have to try to somehow have to make sense of the wayfinders being hidden and you need this dagger, and then you have Ochi and it connects to all these other things, and it's just like that just seems so convoluted that it's again ridiculous. But anyway, there are good scenes in episode 9 in isolation if they are taken out of the context of the greater whole, or if a better context had been created around them. I really do like the scene between Han and Ben on the second Death Star. I think it is the best scene in the entire trilogy. It is well acted, it is well filmed, it has emotional impact, even though the rest of the trilogy around it, the context around it, is pretty bad. I think there is some good stuff between Rey and Maluk in The Rise of Skywalker. I love his line to her that confronting fear is the destiny of a Jedi. I think, again, if everything else around it were better, him raising his X-Wing out of the water would have been a fantastic scene. Again, if you just watch that in isolation, I think it's pretty good. But the problem is everything else around it is broken at that point, that it really kind of lessens the impact. And so if you keep some of these elements in episode 9 and you change episode 8 entirely, you scrap what it was and make something that is, again, more in line, as you're saying here, and then you tone some of the things down in episode 9, some of the ridiculous things I mentioned before, or just fix them, like the dagger, take that out and think of better things. But more or less, you keep that story the same, you keep the movie the same, and maybe instead of Palpatine coming back, episode 8 had made Snoke into an actual threat or a villain that we understood instead of just this kind of bad guy in the background that he is in episode 7. So if you do all those things, and I know that's not exactly your question, you're asking if it could just be kept the same. But if you do all those things, if you change episode 8, if you tone down 9, if you play into some of the good scenes that you had and build the context around them, and have Snoke be the main villain that all our heroes have to defeat together somehow because he's that damn powerful, I don't know, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. It's so hard to say because we already have we have The Last Jedi in our minds. And yes, I know, as I always say, some people love that movie, that's fine, but a lot of us don't. A lot of us think it ruined the trilogy, it derailed everything. So if you take it out of there and just put something different in, I don't think it works, but you could make something work if you change 8 and have some alterations to 9. Alright, let's move on now to this question from Peter Sanzen, who asked, "Hey Thor, what if Mandalorian, Ahsoka, and even Skeleton Crew were set in a post-sequel era? Would those stories be more engaging since they would not have the whole all roads lead to the sequels trope? And would the Mandalorian and Grogu movie be better hyped by many fans?" And I think you might end up with a similar problem where instead of all roads leading to the sequels, all roads will now lead away from the sequels, lead from them. So it's kind of the same thing. If you really don't like the sequels, you probably don't want anything attached to them on either end. You just don't care. Now, as we know, it seems like Disney and Lucasfilm are going post-sequel trilogy with a lot of their stories, with pretty much all the movies coming up. not counting Mando and Grogu, which will still, of course, be set in the Mando time period, as a lot of people call it. But Starfighter, the Simon Kinberg trilogy, the Rey movie, if it ever actually gets made, all of these things will be post-sequel trilogy, and, well, I think there's a lot of people who don't care just because they're, again, coming from the sequels, they're leading out of them, so it's the same thing, just in reverse. Alright, one more question, and it comes to us from Ethan B., who said, "Hey Thor, do you feel like the moral philosophy of the Jedi has been a big influence on how you treat people and act generally? Not to say you're copying fictional characters, just that being exposed to something like that at a very young age must have made it stick with you." And the funny thing is, I don't know how much I understood Star Wars when I was very young. I mean, I got the gist of it, but I don't know that I understood the deep philosophy behind it. And I don't know how much it impacted me when I was very young. I'm not saying I didn't want to be a Jedi. I'm not saying that to some degree it didn't make me want to be a good person who helped people and all of that. But I would say it wasn't until I actually started to really understand Star Wars, and that happened more after the prequels, which kind of just fleshed out the philosophy of the Jedi a lot more than the OT did, and just really starting to think about some of the things in there about how we should try to be more selfless than selfish. I think that is the real takeaway of Star Wars for me, that I can try to be or live a balanced life, and what that means is just trying to be a better person than you are a bad person, or again, more selfless than you are selfish. And I'm certainly not saying I always succeed. I'm not saying I am anything like a Jedi, that I go above and beyond all the time to try and be the best person I can be, and that I give up attachments. I certainly don't do that. I'm a married man. But I do think at some point, and I don't know that it was a conscious decision, that I decided one day I'm going to kind of adopt this as my philosophy, but I do think I try to live by the Jedi philosophy of balance, that yes, if you can just be at least a little bit more selfless than you are selfish, or can just be a caring and compassionate person to some degree, that when you are out in public, you try to understand that how you treat somebody, even if it's just a brief encounter, just saying hello or being friendly to someone working behind the counter at the gas station or at a grocery store, or being kind to a server at a restaurant, or when you're driving in traffic and everybody's all angry and road ragey, just trying to be nicer can have an impact on another person, and maybe they pass it along and are nicer too. I don't know. Anyway, what I'm saying here is that being a lifelong Star Wars fan has certainly brought me to the point where I have studied Star Wars probably more than most people, and that I now see, or believe I see, the simple philosophy George Lucas was trying to explain with it, that, again, try to be more selfless than selfish, and that will lead to balance in the world, that if everybody just gave a little bit more than they took, then nobody goes without, is kind of the philosophy I see behind Star Wars. And I'm not saying like physical stuff necessarily, but I'm saying just kindness or compassion, that if you're just a little nicer than you are mean, that it makes the world a better place. And if everybody did that, the world would be a much, much, much better place. So that's how Star Wars, or the philosophy behind Star Wars, has impacted me personally. Again, I'm not a Jedi. I screw up all the time. I do dumb things. I've been mean to people. I've gotten angry and acted irrationally. I have done all sorts of bad things in my life, just like everybody else. But I think the big difference, or what I try to do, is to at least be aware of them. When I get angry, I try to be aware of that anger and how me getting angry and doing something stupid is going to have a negative impact either on myself or, again, those around me. It all comes down to choices, choosing to try to be a better person. You don't always succeed. But that's what I've learned from Star Wars. That's the philosophy I try to live by. It's very simple. I think it applies to pretty much any situation in life, which is what I love about it. You can always try to be nicer, kinder, more generous, over greedy, selfish, and angry. That's how I tried to live my life. Again, don't always succeed, but how I try to live my life. Alright, I think that is going to be all I got for you this time. Now it is your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you think about anything and everything I had to say here, or by all means, ask a question for a future lightning response video. All you do, you start your question off with "Hey Thor," or your comment off with "Hey Thor." You ask your question. I will try to get to it in a future video, but whatever the case may be, leave those comments below. Let's talk some Star Wars, and until next time, thanks for watching.